Good morning. Sorry, I'm from Alabama. We have a call and response culture, so good morning. Thank you. My name is Carmita Vaughn, and I'm the founder and president of the Surge Institute. And today I have the distinct honor of introducing someone who's been a role model of mine for a decade. Now, Arne likely will not remember this, but 10 years ago, I interviewed with him for my very first job in education. He asked me during that interview only one question, and that question was, why do you want to do this work? I thought it was a pretty easy question. I gave my very well-scripted, very well-prepared answer, and he was unsatisfied with that. Now, my business school professors would have been very satisfied with my well-thought-out, very rational, very logical answer, but he pushed, and ultimately he asked, but why does any of that matter to you? And for the first time in my professional career, I actually opened up about my personal story in a professional context. I talked with Arne about my childhood spent in poverty. I talked with him about the fact that education and access to high quality education opportunities had been the pathway for me out of poverty and had changed the trajectory of my life. I talked with him about the fact that I saw myself in the young people that we serve every day, and ultimately wanted them and the adults that work with them to see them in me. That day, in that interview, Arne taught me that why we do this work matters. Not just that we do it, but ultimately, that message has stayed with me and has been a part of everything that I've done since, including launching the Surge Institute, which is a leadership institute for emerging leaders of color in this work. It is based on the fact that why we do this work matters, and bringing ourselves and our experiences to this work ultimately can lead us to have very sustainable efforts. If you've paid attention, and I know everyone in this room has, you recognize that our secretary is very consistent in this message. Whether he's talking about using technology to increase equity in education or talking about reauthorization of ESEA, his message is consistent and does not waver. Why we do the work matters. Our late Dr. Maya Angelou, in her eloquent simplicity, said that when someone shows you who they are, you better believe them, and believe them the first time. Now, most often I hear that quoted about bad relationships, but in this case, I would say that day in 2005, Arne Duncan showed me exactly who he was, what he believed in, and I haven't stopped believing in him and his earnest desire for the best for our children since then. It is my sincere and distinct honor to introduce you to our U.S. Secretary of Education, Mr. Arne Duncan.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Thank you. Please give another round of applause to Carmita. I'm a huge, huge fan. If I could invest in someone in the stock, I'd be investing in her right now, and you guys should be taking note. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be with all of you. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for inviting me. And I want to begin with a story. And I want to tell you a story about a young man named Rashawn Johnson. Rashawn is 12 years old, and he lives in a small town in South Carolina. His mother dropped out of high school when she became pregnant with him at the age of 16. She works 2 minimum wage jobs in 2 different towns, up to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because his mom works so much, Rashawn is often alone. Because he lives in the country, he doesn't have consistent high-speed access to the internet. And because his family has very little money, he's not spending those idle hours playing learning games many of you develop on his family tablet or computer. His family doesn't have a tablet, and they don't have a computer either. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have access to technology. In fact, he uses it all the time at school, and whenever his mom's not working, he monopolizes her phone to play games and to connect with his friends. But the reality is that Rashawn is growing up during the most globally connected era in human history. And yet for him, technology is a tool of distraction, not discovery. He's not finding new worlds. He's simply filling time. And as all of you know, there are millions of other young people just like Rashawn all across the country. Students who have the chance to connect to an active, evolving network of ideas and possibilities, but are not yet doing so in any way that will help them become actual players in that new world. My question to all of you is, how will all of you help them? What can you invent that helps Rashawn become a part of and a contributor to that network that feels as attractive, as irresistible to him as the games on his mom's smartphone? Every day, people like you are offering up ideas and solutions that would boggle the minds of previous generations. And I'm absolutely convinced that when technology is used to power true innovation, it can become a game changer for education because it has the ability to bridge gaps for those who have the least and open pathways that in the past were inaccessible. Technology has the potential to drive both equity and excellence, and those are the core values that motivate so many of us who do this work every single day. But we also know that technology can just as easily widen the lead for those who already have every advantage and exacerbate the devastating opportunity gap that today confines too many of our children to the margins of society. If the technology revolution only happens for families that already have money and are already well-educated, then I don't think it's really a revolution. So we need to do so much more for Rashawn and the millions of other students just like him who, simply because of their zip code or their parents' income, the language they speak at home, their disability, or some other factor far beyond their control, experience school at a dramatic disadvantage. Technology can't just be a tool for engagement. It has to advance equity. Let me shift gears now. And this right here is Tanisha Dixon. I visited her classroom about a year ago, and what she was doing for her students there simply blew me away. Tanisha teaches at a neighborhood school back in DC, where 99% of the children she serves are low income. It's also a school that shifted to a blended learning model at the beginning of this school year. Tanisha is here today. She's an amazing leader at her school. She's creative, she's compassionate, she's caring, and she's not afraid of change. In fact, she's driving it. She's also relentlessly optimistic. And she's got a job that, no offense, makes developing apps seem like child's play. Tanisha's job every day is to bring the world of ideas to life for an entire room full of students, each with their own unique mix of strengths and interests. That's the challenge that fuels Tanisha's passion for her work over the past 12 years in the classroom. That's also what has her so excited about the promise of blended learning and of being able to meet the individual needs of each child more effectively than she ever has before. But bringing about that sort of shift in a school takes more than just a one-to-one program. This past summer, Tanisha had to get a year's worth of curricula ready for prime time, all by Labor Day. She had to try to convince skeptical colleagues, the adults in the building, that what the school was going through was actually a good idea. She had to calm the nerves of parents who saw something very strange and unfamiliar happening and wondered why things had to change. And she had to spend many late nights working on her lessons and preparing for a completely different sort of a school year. As a result, Tanisha was exhausted before the school year even began. And for the first time in her career, she felt like she was, and I quote, 180 days away from retirement. And the reason was, as she put it, I feel like we're building Rome and the road to it at the same time. Even for someone as committed, as hopeful, and skilled as Tanisha, that's too much for any of us to sustain over the long haul. As a nation, we are making very real progress. High school graduation rates are at all-time highs. Dropout rates are down significantly. And between 2008 and 2012, more than 1 million additional students of color went on to college. Our nation's K-12 schools are in the midst of some of the biggest shifts in decades, from providing every student with high expectations and better assessments to uncovering the uncommon potential of every single individual child. But the reality is that the dramatic changes we hope for simply won't be real, and they definitely won't stick unless we all do a better job of giving principals and teachers like Tanisha the tools and the supports they need to fully reimagine teaching and learning. And as her struggles this year demonstrate, we're not there yet, and in fact, I don't think we're even close. So here's why it's so important that we find ways to help students like Rashawn and teachers and principals like Tanisha. It's because they epitomize both the challenge and the amazing opportunity that we have before us today. The opportunity is to give every student a meaningful and relevant and deeply personal education that prepares them to lead fulfilling lives. And the challenge is that until we get the systems and the supports right, teaching, which is already an extraordinarily difficult job, is a lot harder than it needs to be. Technology is a critical piece of that puzzle. It's the gateway to a different dynamic between a teacher and her students. And it's a tool that can open up limitless new ways to engage children, to empower teachers, and to bring parents into the learning process. To get there, we need to go way beyond using technology to simply recreate the tools of the 20th century. The transformation will occur when the tools and apps that all of you create are not just meeting Rashawn's needs, but also helping his mom to engage with his school and community in new ways, and actually moving the needle at scale in terms of student achievement and success. The transformation will occur when those tools and apps are not just helping Rashawn learn new content, but also providing him with a portal to a larger world that in the past would have remained completely and unjustly out of his reach. The most beautiful airplane in the world doesn't do much for a kid who doesn't have a ticket or doesn't have a passport. And for too many children today, that's exactly what technology is. So this is our collective challenge. I'm here to tell you that what we need is your most innovative thinking on this that stretches beyond what most of us have done to this point. That's the bottom line, that if we want to transform education for what students, particularly disadvantaged students, need to succeed in the future, we have to behave in a very different way. But I'm also here to tell you that we know we all need to do our part. We must be all in together. And today I'm really pleased to announce something that we hope will be a helpful step in the right direction, the first ever EdTech Developer's Guide from our U.S. Department of Ed. It's intended to be a handbook for entrepreneurs, companies, and nonprofits who want to be sure that they are designing the tools that educators and students need to transform the system, not just to recreate the current system online. Under the fantastic leadership of Richard Culatta and his team, we've had people crisscrossing the country for the past 2 years, talking to EdTech entrepreneurs, district leaders, parents and principals, teachers and students, EdTech coordinators, funders, VCs, accelerators, and thought leaders. We canvass the entire education ecosystem to try to ensure that the guide will truly help you meet the needs of real folks out there doing this hard work every single day. And what we discovered was that many of the existing solutions don't address the most urgent needs in education, and the ones that do often don't become widely adopted. So we've outlined some basic but critical questions to ask about the tools that you develop. Are they addressing a real need? Do teachers have the training they need to use your app effectively? How will you protect student and family privacy? Who makes the decision to purchase the tool, and how long does that purchasing cycle take? Can your app transition seamlessly from school to home? What features are most important to parents and to educators and to students themselves? But as helpful as finding concrete answers to those questions might be, all of this work must be in the service of some meaningful goals. So I'd like to outline 3 goals that I'm convinced if we can achieve them would both revolutionize the way we help kids learn and how we help teachers teach all across the country. The first goal is that we must use technology to make education more equitable. To underscore this desperate need, here are some basic but brutal facts that define our education system today. Only 1 in 7 high school sophomores from the lowest income quartile earn a bachelor's degree within 10 years, while sophomores from families in the highest income quartile are 4 times more likely to graduate during that same time period. A 4-year-old who's living in poverty will have heard 30 million fewer words than her wealthier peers by the time she starts school. 1 in 5 poor children cannot read at grade level in the 4th grade. African American and Latino students, primarily boys, are suspended and expelled from school at much higher rates than their white peers, starting as early as preschool. The school-to-prison pipeline, in too many places, is real. And finally, at a time when the STEM fields and going to college have never been more important, only 57% of black high school students are lucky enough to attend a school where the full range of math and science classes are offered. Simply put, the status quo is unacceptable. These facts are an affront to our founding principles. And historically, we maybe didn't always connect them to questions of educational technology. But the reality is that all of this revolves around the issue of equity. And your innovations will either help to mitigate or exacerbate these very real challenges. The growth of freely available open educational resources is a positive step in the right direction. We need all of you to become a more active part of that movement. President Obama's Connect Ed initiative demonstrates his commitment to ensure that 99% of American students will have access to high-speed internet in their schools by 2018. The FCC and Chairman Wheeler have dedicated very real resources to this work. And thanks again to the leadership of Richard Culatta and his team, more than 1,800 school districts across the country have signed a future-ready pledge and committed to create district-wide cultures that embrace the use of technology to tackle some of the most persistent challenges that they face. Simply put, that means the demand is growing for a very different model of schooling. But we need to do more. We need to provide young people with more equitable access to expertise so that every child can have the same opportunity to learn from the best teachers and the most effective resources. We need to leverage technologies in ways that help children with special needs become full participants in their own learning. We need to connect parents of all backgrounds to their schools in ways that empower them to become more active, informed advocates for their children, even when they cannot be there in person because of work or family commitments. And we need to help students and their families make better decisions about their options in higher education, particularly for first-generation college goers. When we do those things, when all of you help us do those things, you won't just be innovating at the edges, you'll be bringing us closer to a more just and a more equitable society. You'll be increasing social mobility and giving more hope to many, many more young people and giving them a real chance to fulfill their dreams and aspirations. Our second goal is that we must make learning more personalized. For the past century, students like Rashawn usually had to get pulled through the same curriculum at the same pace as every other student who happened to be born in the same year in the same town. Today, we have the chance to let Rashawn chart his own path at his own pace. But it's more than just putting him in charge of his own learning. It's helping him become more self-aware, self-directed, and self-reflective as a result. The way to do that is not by giving him a string of adaptive worksheets on a computer or by somehow replacing his peers with a computer screen. The way to do that is by turning him from a digital consumer into a digital creator. How can we give many more young people like Rashawn more opportunities to design and experiment and create, to connect with peers and experts not in their town but across the globe, and to collaborate with them in the practice of solving real-world problems? This is what the future requires and what your future creations must make possible on an unprecedented scale. Finally, our third goal must be to make teaching more sustainable. We must better attract, train, and retain extraordinarily talented and committed individuals like Tanisha. If Tanisha's here, have her please stand. Where is she? She's over here. Please give her a big round of applause. And if you haven't been to her classroom yet, like I have, please go check her out. In the end, our ability to reimagine education all comes down to Tanisha and her colleagues, and our ability, through better policies and platforms, to put them in a position to do something that has never been done before. As I listen to great educators all around the country, many say the same thing. Teaching is both the most difficult and the most rewarding job that you can ever have. It's the most rewarding because your job is literally to transform the ways that young people see themselves and the world around them. And it's the most difficult because too often their efforts are not fully appreciated or supported or rewarded. The implications of those deeply held beliefs are clear. If we want to make teaching a more desirable and sustainable profession, We need innovative approaches that amplify the rewards, enhance the connectedness, and diminish the difficulties of being a teacher. One way all of you can help is by building tools that provide the same sort of personalized feedback to teachers that we expect them to be providing to their students. We need tools that ease the administrative burdens of the job in order to free teachers up to spend more time interacting with and providing feedback to the students they serve. We need tools that make it easier for educators to make sense of all the information they're going to have access to about their students and apply it in real time to help unleash the curiosity and imagination of students like Rashawn Johnson. And we need to more actively solicit the input and wisdom of teachers in everything that will impact their work, from policy to product development. And let me quickly repeat that. We need to solicit the input and the wisdom of teachers in everything that impacts their work. So I hope a few of you find Tanisha at the next coffee break and ask her about the reality of her daily work. I know that takes time and energy, but nothing is more important than building strong partnerships with teachers and principals and students and parents to directly inform everything that you do. Please also hold us accountable to do our part, whether it's trying to support districts that want to make learning more personalized, investing in promising innovations, or setting the conditions for teachers to amplify their voices. If we truly want teachers like Tanisha to reimagine teaching and learning for young people like Rashawn and not get burned out along the way, that requires your best ingenuity and innovation. We cannot get there without all of you. The future is about putting all of us in a position, once and for all, to leave behind the notions of students as empty vessels and education as an assembly line. There's a remarkable opportunity before us to use technology, to use your skills, to use your creativity and energy to make society more just and more fair. Thank you so much for what you have done, and thank you for your commitment and for the difference that I know you will make going forward in the lives of children who simply need a chance. And I promise you, they will more than meet us halfway. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
For the discussion that we're going to be having in a moment, just a quick introduction. I'm Rebecca Jarvis. I'm ABC News' Chief Business and Economics Correspondent. And I will be joined out here by Secretary Duncan as well as Richard Culatta. He is the Director of Technology at the Department of Education. And the way we're going to do this to get all of your questions out there is anyone can ask a question right now. I will be reading them. Here's how you get it out there. You tweet it. Ask Arne. So make sure you hashtag your questions, ask Arne, and we'll start answering those questions. So now's a good time to start taking out those phones if you don't already have it sitting out. And I want to start, it was a really, really informative speech you just gave. I had an opportunity to speak to Tanisha beforehand, an extraordinary woman who has made extraordinary strides. And in looking at those strides that she makes and is making, I wonder about our commitment and the financial side of all of this, because you have to make choices. And some of those choices are very difficult, choosing between spending on people versus spending on technology. And how do you go about balancing those two things?
I think in many areas there are false trade-offs, false dichotomies. The truth is we have to spend much more effectively both on people and on technology. So sort of walk it through. We as a nation spend on, never enough money. I'm always the biggest proponent for more money for education. It's an investment, not an expense. But we as a nation spend $7 to $9 billion a year on textbooks that are basically obsolete the day they arrive in school. So my question to school districts around the nation are, why are we spending $7 to $9 billion on something that is too, by the time it gets to you, it's too late? So we can use that money in a very different way. We have some districts here that are doing an extraordinary job. Mooresville, North Carolina, superintendent is here. He's done a remarkable job of leading the nation in this area. But we have a small minority of districts at that point. In terms of spending on people, on professional development, I've been very public in this. We invest $2.5 billion each year. States and districts spend at least match that, so somewhere between $5 and $6 billion. That's the worst money we spend. When I talk to teachers and ask them and how much we spend and what we do, when I talk about $2.5 billion, they laugh or they cry. They're not feeling that. So for me, the question is not just dollars, it's effectiveness. Is spending money on textbooks effective now? I think it's not. I think it's obsolete. Is most of our money spent on teacher professional development and supporting principals effective? It's not. So the question for all of us is how do we do things that actually help them get better at what they do? Yes, we should probably invest more, but we have to do a better job of what we have.
This question comes from Mentor Super, and he asks, what barriers do schools need to overcome to build blended learning to scale?
So it's a great time to be looking at blended learning. I love the question because one of the things I've described blended learning as, you know when you pick up a rock and sort of you lift it and there's all these ugly squishy things under it and weird stuff that you hadn't seen for a while? Sometimes when we transition to blended learning, it does the same thing in our education space. So all of a sudden we say, wait a minute, we've been doing these fixed time sessions where every class is the exact same time. Now that we start to use technology to lift up that rock, we go, should we really be doing that? And so I think that the answer is it's a great opportunity to rethink a whole variety of stuff that we've just sort of taken as a given in education, right? That class should be the same, that every student should move at the same pace, that everybody needs to have the exact same interactions with their teachers and with their peers. And so I think the most exciting things that are happening as we transition to blended learning is just rethinking what do these tools and apps that we have do that allow us to not have to just do what we've always done before. And it's why I'm so excited about not having tools simply digitize traditional practice.
Where are you seeing the best models of that, Richard?
There's some fantastic models. I was recently visiting a great school in, well, actually North Carolina was one that Arne just mentioned, so Mooresville's doing some fantastic stuff. But also, we were out at a school in California. This is a school with my friend Daryl Adams, who's the superintendent. And he just said, we need to make sure every kid has access everywhere they are. And so one of the things that he did is he went and took his buses. Right, buses that are sitting around, they're useless at the end of the day, they provide no service after the kids get off them. And he put wireless hotspots on all the buses, and he drives them all around the town and parks them around the town and turns his whole town into a wireless hotspot so the students can continue working on their devices at home at night. That's the sort of stuff that just inspires you when you hear about it.
I would like to ride on that school bus. This question is from East Coast, Idaho, and he asks, what is the single worst thing an ed tech entrepreneur could do as they approach students and teachers with their ideas?
I'll start, you can go second. I just can't emphasize enough two things. One, you have to listen. You have to be meeting real needs. It can't be your great idea. And two, for me, it's got to be all about outcomes. It can't be the glitzy thing, the razzle-dazzle thing. What are we doing to close achievement gaps? What are we doing to raise the bar for everyone? What are we doing to increase graduation rates? What are we doing to make sure our high school graduates are truly college and career ready? So you have to listen, you have to be very humble, and you have to be meeting a real need and hold yourselves accountable for having a significant impact on student outcomes.
The one thing I would add is that a lot of people come and love to show me the apps that they're building. They don't know that Arne doesn't let me buy too many apps these days. So they come and show me their apps.
Work for the government.
That's right. One of the questions that I always asked, I used to ask was, did you involve teachers and students along the way? And the answer was always yes. And so what I began to ask was a smarter question, which is, how are you involving teachers and students along the way? And it turns out in many cases it's, hey, we built this app, it's all done, now we're going to take it and say, do you like the blue buttons or the red buttons, right? That's not the type of involvement that we really need. And what we really need to have effective tools and apps are teachers and students that are involved all the way through the design process, that are actually part of the teams that are building the apps of the future, and that's an important shift.
This question comes from M. Garena. How do we change the culture of paper textbooks?
You have to get rid of them. I don't, it's just.
You want to get rid of textbooks?
I've been saying that for a couple years now. Yes, I don't know why we have textbooks for all kinds of reasons. And again, were we to get rid of them tomorrow, we would still not be leading the world. Other countries are ahead of us, and I'm always looking at what our international peers are doing. So places like Uruguay are already at 1-to-1 with students and devices. And so I worry that we are moving too slow. And again, while we have some fantastic school districts, and we'd love to highlight those examples, we have 15,000 school districts, we have 50 states, and the vast majority are spending huge amounts of money on textbooks every single year. Not to go on too long on this, the crazy thing is that some places, because textbooks are expensive, are on 7-year adoption cycles. So they buy a new math book every 7 years, a new social studies book every 7 years. And again, just think how old that book is, how obsolete it is by the time it gets there. It just makes no sense. And what we're seeing, while it's still early, most places that have moved from textbooks to devices have done it basically at cost. Some have actually told me they've saved a little bit of money. And so this is not some huge, there's not some, I wish we had a huge pot of money for this, we don't. But I'm not convinced we need a huge pot of money. We need to just reallocate existing resources.
If you throw copy machines and toners and printer on top of there, then you're golden.
You're home.
This comes from NYC Margaret M. What is the best way to learn what is working for teachers, finding great schools and great teachers?
I'll go back to where I started. You have to listen. You have to spend time. And I try and get in 2 or 3 schools every single week. These have to be real relationships. It can't be drive-by, as Richard said. It can't be surfacey or symbolic. You have to really listen. I sort of went on in length about the story of Tanisha because I think this is very real. She is an extraordinary talent. And she is struggling today because this work is so hard. Mm-hmm. And if we can't help folks like Tanisha stay in the classroom and be supported and be successful, we're not going to get there, which is not possible. So I think having real long-term relationships, continue to grow and evolve with teachers, with students, with parents, that's the only way I know how to get there.
What about the biggest barriers between industry and schools right now? How have you seen them broken down? What is the most effective way to do that?
Talk about your guide a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, that's exactly the reason why we have the guide that we released today, is we heard these questions sort of over and over again of how do we work with schools? What does procurement look like in school? One of the things that we all know is that procurement is just really difficult in schools, and we feel that from every side. People in schools have trouble with it, people that are trying to sell to schools. And so we've had cases where we've had people come and they have a great idea, and I say, hey, how are you gonna try to get that adopted? And they say, well, we're just gonna go knock on the door of the school and try to sell it to the principal, right? And it just doesn't work that way. And so part of what we're trying to do is we went and talked to literally hundreds of people who have been successful in this space, have built apps that have been meaningful, closed some of these equity gaps that Arne was talking about, and really found a way to make it work. And we said, what did you do? How did you do it? And we tried to capture that in this guide. And so our hope is that the guide is a way to say, here's some things you need to know to work better with schools, to work better with community, to understand privacy. That's something we don't want anybody to be surprised by. Think early on about what you should do to keep student data safe, and that's all in the guide.
At Dintersmith asks, what will you and the DOE be doing in the next 2 years to engage and inspire our students and teachers?
Well, again, I think the best way we can learn and get better and hopefully try and inspire a little bit is to be out there and spend time and listen and talk to students, talk to teachers, talk to parents. I mentioned I couldn't be more proud that high school graduation rates are at all-time highs. Dropout rates for black students is down 45%. Latino has been cut in half, 50%. So we're going the right direction, but we're not getting better fast enough. So I think the challenge for all of us is how do we accelerate the pace of changing, and that's why I think the power of what, the brain power in this room is so it makes me so hopeful. We have to find ways to accelerate, and I think ultimately what inspires me is just these amazing young people who I see all over the country who are not born with silver spoons in their mouths, who are overcoming huge challenges, sometimes at school, in the community, at home, and are still committed to getting their education. Mm-hmm. And I just, again, from a lifetime experience working on the South Side of Chicago, where we give kids a chance, where we provide them the opportunities, they're going to do extraordinarily well. It's incumbent upon us as adults to give them that opportunity.
One last question. For those who are using this guidebook that you've put out, hopefully it will be as popular as developing something for the Apple Watch. It's well timed to that. How do people think about balancing the entertainment side with the education side and making it so that it's popular, that people want to adopt it, but also actually valuable?
Yeah, so let me make a comment about that. One of the things that I hear that just drives me crazy is when people say, we need to build stuff that makes learning fun, right? Learning is fun. We don't have to make it fun. It's fun. We actually have the opposite problem, is that we do a lot of stuff that makes learning not fun. Yeah. And so what I'd love to have this new technology do and these new types of apps is say, how do you keep learning fun even as we get into really difficult things? It's one of the reasons I'm so excited about games for learning and some of the really neat, innovative ways. Games are hard. If you watch what the amount of time and effort kids put into leveling up on games, it's hard. Let's apply that to things that are equally as fun but haven't felt fun for students for a long time.
Closing thoughts.
Again, just appreciate what folks here have done over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but we're still in our infancy. We're still crawling. And if we can take that next step over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I literally think we transform education for decades to come. And I meant what I said before. We can't do it without the brain power and the expertise and the passion and the commitment of folks in this room. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.